In this video, we're going to help you get more of an understanding of the DDMS perspective. Now, this is a very useful perspective in Eclipse, and if you recall, we went through in an earlier video and discussed perspectives and how to create our own and so forth. But DDMS is short for the Dalvik Debug Monitor Service and is a GUI debugging application shipped with the Android SDK. Enables you to get some more information out of an emulator, out of the Android virtual device, or out of the a real physical Android device on the state of your running application. So let's switch over to Eclipse and check it out. Okay, so I'm going to, as always, go into the Android Developer Tools folder, Eclipse subfolder, Start Eclipse, and I'm going to click OK to accept the default workspace. Now we've got our standard My First App test here. We're going to be using this project for this video. Now what I want to do before I go too much further with perspectives, so one thing I didn't do was show you how to delete perspectives. So what I'm going to do is come over here to this TIM perspective. We're going to create a new one. We're going to right click it and save as and create a new one. And we're just going to call this work. It's going to be our work perspective. And from this point forward in the course, we're going to use that. So I've saved that. Now that has saved it as a new perspective, and it's got exactly the same as whatever the current perspective was that we were using. In this case, it was the TIM perspective. But what it hasn't done is deleted the existing perspective. So to do that, you'll find that if you go into Window and look in around here, that there's a Save Perspective As, there's a Reset Perspective. And that doesn't really do what we want because that just sets it back to its default state. You can close it, but there's no delete. The reason is delete's not there. To find the delete, you go into the Eclipse folder if you're on a Mac, or you'll be going into the Windows program and selecting Preferences if you're on Windows. And so we're going to Preferences, and I'm going to expand the General section, and there's an option here, Perspectives. Now this is a list of all the perspectives. You'll notice it's got the work perspective that we just created a minute or so ago. There's also the TIM perspective. So I'm going to select the TIM perspective and click on delete. And at this point it's now deleted and no longer available. So there you go, that's how to delete a perspective. But moving on, what we want to do now is use this DDMS perspective. So by default, if we go to click on it now, it's showing us that we've got an Android virtual device running. So I click on that, we've got some information, but we're not running our application yet. So to run our application, what we want to do is go back to our work perspective, just so we've got that on screen. We want to click on the name of the app, then we want to click on debug, the little picture of the little bug, and it's debugging the app. So when we start that, we select which device we want to run it on, and initially we're going to be using our emulator, our Android virtual device, and we're going to click OK. Now that application should be running on our device. I'll just unlock it. And there's our application. Okay, so at this stage, we can go back to Eclipse and go into the DDMS perspective. Now what we can do is we can select our app, and we can see the list of all the apps running. And again, looking at the package names, you can see there's ours there, org.example.myfirstapp. The little green bug tells us that it's running in debug mode. The first things we can do, there's quite a few different things we can do here, but one of the first useful things is we can take a screenshot. So to do that, we can click on this little camera here, and it'll go out and get a screenshot of the screen. Now what you'll often find is running an emulator, running an Android virtual device, the screenshots won't work. You'll need, in fact, to be running on a real device. The reasons, it's been a bug that's been in Eclipse on and off for a number of years, and to be honest, they haven't done a really good job at fixing it. We're going to go back to our work perspective, go to our window, and go to our Android Virtual Device Manager. Now the issue is this field here, Use Host GPU. If you recall, we had that enabled so that we'd get the maximum performance from our Android virtual device, and that it would therefore be much more efficient and a better experience for us. Unfortunately, it seems to be the case that there's an issue here with this. If this is enabled, then there are issues with screenshots and getting black screenshots or blank ones seems to be the norm, unfortunately. So we'll just go back and just test it again, but it seems to be something that's quite normal. So again, clicking on our app over here, again, we're in the DDMS perspective. Click on the camera. We'll probably get a black screen again. And we're still getting a black screen. Now, because of the resolution that I'm recording this video in, you can't see the entire screen. But what we'll do, just to make sure and just sort of show you what it's meant to do, I'm going to plug in my real and physical Android device now. So I'm plugging that in. Okay, I've plugged that in. We should now see that that's running here. So I'm just going to close that down. We go back to the work perspective. And we're going to run it again. Clicking on the debug button. But this time I'm going to select my Android device. Not the Android virtual device. So we're now running it on the real device. We can see a little bit of output there. So if we now go back to our DDMS perspective, we can see that our application is now running on the real device. And now if we do a screenshot, we should find it works. So again, I'm selecting my application and clicking on the screen. Okay, and there's the screenshot. Now the screenshot is absolutely huge because it's trying to open it up in the native resolution of the device. And I've got an Nexus 7, which is quite a high resolution device. But you can see that the real screenshot was taken. And what I'll do just to prove that, I'm going to close down the app on my device, do a refresh. And we've got an updated screenshot, as you can see. So you can then rotate that if you want to, if it's the wrong, in the wrong position. I'll just rotate it right around until it's back to where it was again. And you can also copy it to the clipboard if you want, but I'm going to save it. Just as a proof of concept, I'm going to save it into our developer folder. Click on done. And I'm just going to tab over to that. Back into the developer folder. And you'll be able to see that I've actually got a complete image. So there you go. That's the screenshot, just showing that the screenshot does work. So you probably have troubles with the Android in an Android virtual device, or you may have trouble, but certainly it works on a physical device. But moving on. The principles are going to be the same here. Because I'm on the physical device now, we may as well stick to that. But again, the principles will be exactly the same if you're running it on the Android virtual device. Select the device, select your app. We're going to click on some of these other menus here. So Threads is one. So what we need to do is enable that by clicking on this button here. The update. And this is a list of threads that are running on the system. We can then double click these. And it gives you some information about what's running. Not particularly useful, but it will become a little bit more relevant as we move further in the course. Think of this as a sort of a real-time list of things that are running, or that the app that we've created are actually using. Or resources, I should say, that the app is using. So moving on to Heap, same deal there. Now Heaps are not enabled, so by default you need to go over here and click on the Heap button. And then we need to do the cause GC. Now GC stands for garbage collection. And what that does is goes through and clears the memory that has been originally allocated but is no longer in use. So there you can see these are the memory allocations from our actual application. So we can click into those and you can sort of see a graphical representation of the amount of memory that each each object or each variable, I should say, has been using. Variable or class, or whatever the case may be, was using. So again, more of that in the future, but I just really want to just point out that the functionality is there, so you can get quite in detail and sort of really drill down to find out where there's a problem, if there's a problem with your the way the memory is being allocated, if you've got an error or something like that. So it's good that you can go through and get to that sort of fine level of detail, if you will. Allocation, we start tracking. Gives you some data as well. We'll click on Get Allocations. Much along the same line. And again, this will make more sense down the track. Now, network, we're not using any. The network is if your application is using the network, so if it's actually going out onto the internet or something like that. So in this case, we're not doing anything like that at this stage, so of course that's not going to be showing us anything. The other useful thing is the File Explorer. So what we're seeing now is a sort of explorer of the file system on the actual Android device itself. So in this case, it's on my Google Nexus 7 Android device. So it enables us to sort of get a bit of a breakdown on the various files and the file structures and so forth. good if you want to transfer and just sort of check a few things out, but we're not going to be using this much more now, but it's just there so you can see, and I can drill right down and go into whatever level of detail, essentially that I want to, which is good. Okay, that's File Explorer Emulator. Now in this section here, which won't get into too much more detail, but especially it's of special use if you're on a virtual device. And this is where you can sort of simulate some actions like an incoming telephone. If you're writing an app or that supports something along those lines, here's where you set up the simulation for it. Likewise with GPX, for example, that is actually GPS. So it enables you to mock up some information about GPS, again for testing purposes. And lastly, system information is an overview of everything that's running on the system. So it can be useful. You can click on an update, CPU load, how busy it is, the amount of memory that's being used, frame render time, and so on. And again, I can easily switch over to here if I wanted to and go back to my other app. Then go back to Threads and click on the Threads button. And this time I'm looking at the emulator, the Android virtual device, and not the real device. So it's quite useful. It's quite a useful perspective to get into. The screenshots, of course, is very useful. The reason you'd want to use that is if you're you finished your application, you want to upload it, say, to the Google Play App Store. Well, they need screenshots of the application running. So it can be good to get the running in an emulator or on the real device. Get it to the stage where you want the screenshot to be taken. Click on a button, and you've got the screenshot here ready to go, and you can save it straight to your computer and upload it. It can be a little bit complicated sometimes doing screenshots on an Android device. I know it's a combination of two buttons, and for me, I'm forever pressing the wrong button and turning the volume down instead of taking a screenshot. So this is just a much easier way of taking screenshots. But I certainly do use some of these other things, like checking out the amount of memory. Is something that I will certainly often use. That's probably the main thing that I use, particularly if I think there's a problem in my program code. This can be the place to look for, or look at, I should say, for the solution. So that's the DDMS perspective. I hope you got a lot out of that, and let's move on to the next video.